We are editors in this world, and we must be careful that everything does not become homogenous. You're all smart marketeers, you're working with good people, and yet we don't use what I would call a creative superpower in our work. 54%. I think if this stat was in any other format for finance, for media, we'd all be running towards it, but we don't. I'm here to talk about emotive, creative, how it still wins. We've been talking about AI a lot, and from a creative perspective, I just think it's really exciting. I talk to our teams a lot about AI. A lot of people find it slightly daunting, I think. But when you break it down, for us, we talk about assist, automate, and innovate. And the innovation area is just exciting. You know, it gives us opportunities to do things we have never done before. So from that point of view, I think it's great. I do think, however, there are a few fears that we should be very aware of. I think there's an idea flying around the industry at the moment that AI somehow levels the playing field for creativity. I don't think it does. I think AI democratizes the production of creative. So we have brands who may never have been able to afford to do certain things from a production point of view, but it does not democratize creativity itself. And we've heard a lot about that today, I think. The skills and craft of perspective, taste, judgement, originality are all still the things that will make something good or bad. We just talked a moment about discernibility. Same thing. We are editors in this world, and we must be careful that everything does not become homogenous. And the one thing that I think we need more than anything in our work is an injection of emotion. It's quite interesting, there's so much going on, there's so much change, but the one thing that's constant, and that's been constant forever in our field, is the need for emotion in our work. And there are a number of reasons for that. Why does emotion work? Well, it builds relationships. Really simple human level, it builds relationships. It can trigger the right emotions and can build trust. It can de-risk decisions. Again, we've talked about that today. But the most important thing of all, for me, is that emotions make things stick in your mind. And this is not me preaching. This is not just a creative soapbox moment, as much as I'd love that. I think every study you see today will tell you the same thing. And I'll just take a recent one. There's a recent study being done by FE and System 1. You're probably all aware of these people. I think they took thousands of campaigns, billions in media spend, B2B and B2C admittedly, but the results were the same across the board. You get 4 times higher incremental profit from emotion-led campaigns. That goes up to 5 times on a 6-month campaign. And if we use compound creativity over time, over anything up to about 3 years, that goes up to 7.5 times. Those are just amazing numbers, right? And they're everywhere. And yet, all the evidence shows that we simply don't use the power of emotion enough in our work. So it got me thinking, well, why is that, right? You're all smart marketeers, you're working with good people, and yet we don't use what I would call a creative superpower in our work. So I put it down to the fact that I think there's probably a new tribe that is breeding in our society, actually, particularly in our industry. And I think we've all experienced them. We've all heard this before. I hope there's none of us in the room today that are like this, but I call them the yeah buts. There's always a reason, right? We shouldn't do this or that within our work. There's always a reason not to use emotion. They don't all look like that, but you get my point. Let's talk about a few of them today. I'm going to try and help sort of counter those arguments that we get every day around why we shouldn't do certain things. One of my favourites, yeah, but it's B2B. I mean, I think we're better than that. Whether it's B2B or B2C, we are all humans at the end of the day. I think we're all looking for connection. And just to kick us off, I thought I'd just bring out a case study of something which I believe has done this really well over the last few years. You'll probably know it, but it's a really interesting way that they've taken what is a bottom drawer idea about our product makes you look good and just made it really emotional. So I'm sure you've seen some of that before, but I just think it's lovely. Great work, great results aimed at humans. One of the yeah buts you're probably thinking, having seen that, is the following. Yeah, but I don't have the budget for big rock star moments. That's okay. I think this is not about spend, it's about an approach. And I'll give you a couple of examples. 86% of your competitors use our software. That is simply a line that has been written to elicit an emotional response. It's really simple. That is not about spend, it's about an approach. Another approach could be, this is actually Salesforce protesting outside of Microsoft's offices to make the point that cloud was the future. That is a lovely, defiant, rebellious sort of way, got a bit of urgency to it. That's not a cost. Again, it's an attitude and an approach and a bit of creative thinking. One we hear a lot, yeah, but our buyers are rational. The engineers, scientists. Look, they're not mutually exclusive. Emotions and rationality can fit together very, very well. And I think this is a great example of them. Self-preservation is one of the most rational human instincts of all, right? And that gave us life to one of the most famous lines that we all know about. No one ever got fired for buying IBM. That is self-preservation personified, and it totally hits both sides. It's rational, it's emotional. Yeah, but I don't want it to be funny. I think this is amazing. The figures on this, 6 times more efficient at driving growth. So I'd ask why you don't want it to be funny in the first place when you have these sorts of figures. Yet 95% of leaders fear it. I think if this stat was in any other format for finance, for media, we'd all be running towards it, but we don't. And I think that's really interesting because it's creativity. We fear humour. If you're still not sold, that's not a problem. People tend to think there's only 5 or 7 emotions that we can pick on. There's not. If you look at a thing called emotional granularity, it gives us a massive canvas to explore. Persecuted, overwhelmed, apathetic. There's so many ways we could go in. I mean, nauseated is on there, and it may be not top of your list. However, jealous, exposed, I think they're interesting territories for a brand to play in. They're still emotional. They're not humour, although you might inject a little bit of wit into it. But I think it gives us a massive canvas to explore. Yeah, but I need to explain how it works. Why? I would ask why. What makes you think I want to know how it works? And what's the benefit to me? And I think it's particularly relevant today for all the chat about AI. Because we're all under such pressure to show off our AI capabilities and tell people about them, we sort of drive to telling them about the AI itself rather than the benefit the AI can bring to us. And I've just pulled out an example of somebody I think did this really well in the last year or so. This is basically a piece of software to allow you to do websites for SMEs really beautifully. It's all backed with AI. The tech is massive within this. And yet they simply found a lovely insight around the fact that SMEs all worried about whether they were getting away with it as they're growing their business and reflected that in the work. So it's like you know what you're doing. AI-powered innovation, no complex messaging, all about the benefit. So I think that's a watch out for us, particularly at the moment, that we should stop telling people how we make things and tell them about the human benefit. Yeah, but it's complicated. Okay, sure, but our job surely is to simplify that complication, not embrace it. And again, I've got a little example here of what I think is quite a complicated message distilled into something that has a lovely piece of emotion to it. It's an oldie, but it's a goodie. Yeah, but what about the stats? Again, another one that we hear. 63% of attendees remember stories after a presentation, only 5% remember stats. And I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate the irony of that I'm telling you that without an emotional story, which you'll forget. I kind of love that. Yeah, but my CFO won't like it. Will he not like this or she not like this? 40% lower ROI on a campaign which does not include emotion. I think that's just a fantastic stat to play back to anybody that's questioning this. And there are so many in here that we could pull off. Yeah, but I'd rather play it safe. Again, understandable, right? There's so much going on. It's so fast-paced. And all of this, I think, all of this data leads us to feel like creative decisions are kind of more uncertain than other decisions. So it's an interesting point, I think, that we use these stats elsewhere around our business a lot to justify media, to justify spend. And yet within creative we have the stats, but because it's creativity, it's somehow deemed more dangerous. But last stat, I can assure you, a recent study in the US, 54% of B2B ads in the US generated total neutrality. No happiness, no surprise, nothing. And I think that is the framing of the risk conversation. And it's totally opposite to the way we're thinking. It's riskier not to do anything because we're wasting money. It is a pure waste. And finally, yeah, but it's a bit of a boring subject. Well, that may be true, but making dull work won't help that. It just kills any chance of positivity towards your message. And I'd just like to share one last example with you of it. Well, I would say, forgive me if anybody's in the room as a data storer, data storage could be seen as slightly uninspiring. Here's how to make it a little bit more entertaining. So, hopefully, today we'll have armed you with a few arguments, if you like, and counter-arguments to the yeah buts. I think we should be banishing this to Room 101. We have the stats, all the facts are there. Let's put them in Room 101. Because in a world drowning in content, the brands that win in 2026 and beyond will be the ones brave enough to tell stories that make people feel something. And if you don't believe me, let's believe one of the best urban philosophers of our time, Noel Gallagher. People will never forget the way you made them feel. Thank you.